Every 62 minutes, one person dies from various eating disorders worldwide. According to statistics, 5 to 6% of all these deaths are due to anorexia. 90% of all cases of anorexia in modern society are accounted for by women. The symptoms of this disease do not only include refusal to eat and progressive weight loss, but also a complex psychological background. Anorexia nervosa refers to psychogenic behavioral syndromes. This means that it occurs under the influence of emotional upheaval and mental disorders. Many experts consider anorexia a form of self-harm, equating it with self-inflicted injuries or the use of toxic substances. It is worth noting that the risk of suicide among people who intentionally injure themselves is very high. A pathological desire to lose weight is characteristic of anorexia. It is accompanied by a strong fear of obesity. Patients also have a distorted perception of their physical shape. We got used to considering anorexia a disorder of modern society. However, the refusal to eat normally and a painful desire to starve is not a new phenomenon. The earliest medical descriptions of anorexia nervosa are attributed to the Englishman Richard Morton, one of the eminent physicians of the 17th century, a member of the Royal College of Physicians. Morton wrote about one of his patients as follows: "And in the 18th year of her life, in the month of July, she fell into a complete depression from the many worries and passions in her mind, but without any symptoms of hypochromia following this. Her appetite began to decline, and her digestion became bad. Her flesh has become limp and loose, and she looks pale." The girl sought medical advice from Dr. Morton after being ill for 2 years, and even then, the reason for visiting a doctor was not fasting, but frequent fainting. Morton described it as skeleton covered with skin. No less often, anorexia occurred during the Middle Ages and among nuns. Now this condition is called anorexia mirabilis, as it was common among women who devoted their lives to faith and servicing the church. 7 or 8 centuries ago, a lot of nuns aspired to completely or almost completely refuse any food, and it was not considered either a deviation or a disease. On the contrary, such behavior was admired by others, and it was connected not with emotional trauma, but with a commitment to asceticism. Since the time of the ancient Greeks, there has been an idea of the soul as something sublime, and of the body as something base. Christianity that came to European civilization only exacerbated this confrontation between body and soul. Soon, the love of carnal pleasures, including the enjoyment of food, was declared a sin. Anorexia mirabilis spread mainly in the Catholic environment. Perhaps the reason was the great influence of monastic orders preaching extreme asceticism. For example, the Franciscan order. In the pursuit of holiness and sinlessness, the nuns suppressed any needs of their bodies. As a result, they starved themselves to death at a very young age. That didn't stop them. Anorexia was also a way for the ministers of the church to approach Christ through physical suffering. A whole book by historian Rudolph M. Bell, published in 1985 under the appropriate title Holy Anorexia, was devoted to this phenomenon. Researching for the book, he analyzed the collection of patristic writings, Bibliotheca Sanctorum, which contained a list of approximately 30,000 saints. There were not so many women who would have the status of holy, blessed, revered saints and servants of God in this list. Although the historical data is full of gaps, in his book Bell suggests that most of the fair sex on the list of saints showed signs of anorexia. Among the women described in Bibliotheca Sanctorum, there are many influential personalities. For example, Angela da Foligno created a literary monument of Catholic thought, and Columba of Rieti, who served as the abbess of a church in Perugia, as well as Clara of Assisi, who founded the Order of St. Clare. Pilgrims flock to their burial sites to this day, and the Catholic Church still uses these women as role models. One of the most famous holy nuns with anorexia is Catherine of Siena. Tertiary of the Dominican order and Italian religious figure of the late Middle Ages, she gained fame in church circles thanks to the mystical writing Dialogues on the Providence of God. Catherine of Siena was born in 1347 in the Italian city of Siena, and always led an ascetic life. Her main desire was to completely rid herself of carnal addictions, that is, to fully control her needs for sleep and food. The English historian Edmund G. Gardner, in his study of Catherine's life, wrote that by the end of her life she had reached such a high degree of asceticism that she ate only the holy gifts, slept only half an hour every 2 days, prayed a lot, sleeping on bare boards, and besides she wore chains, iron chains and rings that were worn under clothes on a naked body to tame the flesh. When, in her youth, her mother took Catherine to the warm springs of Bagni di Vignone, the girl chose the most boiling of them, and, having entered the water, imagined that she was going through tortures of the damned. From the age of 6, Catherine began to see visions of Jesus appearing before her. At such an early age, she prayed a lot and sought for secluded places where she scourged herself, encouraging other children to do the same rituals. At 15, her diet consisted of only a small amount of bread and raw vegetables. 5 years later, after her father's death, Catherine refused bread and ate only the host, unleavened bread made from flour and water, placed on the tongue during Holy Communion. According to historians, in the last years of her life, this efficient nun experienced a physical aversion to food, but at the same time was amazingly active. Over time, she began to refuse to take water, too. Because of this, she was in an absolute breakdown, experienced convulsions, and fell into oblivion. At some point, due to paralysis, the nun stopped feeling her own legs. In her visions during this period, not saints but demons increasingly began to come to her. She saw them standing behind the backs of those people who looked after her. The death of Catherine Siena was preceded by 8 weeks of agony, during which she remained bedridden in her small cell. The nun died in 1380 from exhaustion. She was only 33 at the time of her death. There are some similarities between modern and medieval anorexia, but at the same time they differ in many ways. If today this disorder is caused by the fear of obesity and a violation of the perception of one's own body, centuries ago food was refused for spiritual purposes. However, in those ancient times, predominantly women suffered from anorexia. As it is now, the disorder began to manifest itself most often in a period close to puberty. Notably, most medieval nuns exhibited high levels of physical activity. This may be because many people with eating disorders have traits such as perfectionism, loneliness, and self-restraint. By the way, today many people with anorexia also show a craving for self-harm that looks very much like medieval saints. The average person with both the holy anorexia of the Middle Ages and the anorexia nervosa of today can be described as follows: an introverted perfectionist with high motivation and purposefulness, as well as with emotional disturbances and obsessive behavior. It is not uncommon for anorexia to be accompanied by depression, although the term anhedonia is more suitable, the inability to enjoy oneself. The historian Rudolf Bell has his own sociological explanation for the relationship between both forms of anorexia. According to him, they can be considered a kind of self-control and self-affirmation in women who are under pressure from patriarchal structures. Simply put, anorexia is a means of self-identification in a world ruled by men. At the same time, many physicians note that the causes of anorexia are not only sociological, but also biological. The fact is that the neurotransmitter serotonin, which is also called the hormone of happiness, affects the level of anxiety and obsessive behavior, and also regulates appetite. Some genetic and physiological studies suggest that disturbances in the production of serotonin can trigger the development of eating disorders and exacerbate this condition. But psychologists who are also in search of the causes of anorexia have long pointed out the feeling of fear as a starting emotion, and only quite recently they began to consider also such emotion as aversion. It is this feeling that plays a special role in the contraction and development of depression, some phobias, and forms of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Aversion may be a key emotion in the development of anorexia, both in the Middle Ages and today. The feeling of physical aversion develops as a result of biological and cultural factors, forming a contradiction between body and mind. Medieval anorexia was identified with the search for spiritual purity. A distorted view of physical perfection is at the core of modern anorexia. However, in both cases, the mind prevails over the body. Aversion breeds self-hatred and shame, and these emotions create the prerequisites for refusing food. One of the first scientists to study the nature of aversion was Charles Robert Darwin. In his book On the Expression of Emotions in Man and Animals, the famous naturalist describes aversion as something that tastes terrible. He makes a correlation between facial expression and various feelings, compares the manifestation of aversion in different cultures. For a long time, aversion was considered a basic emotion that did not require detailed study, until a psychology professor at the University of Pennsylvania named Paul Rosen became interested in it in the late 1980s. The researcher believes that the basis of aversion is the sensation of something in the mouth that is considered disgusting or spreading infection. A feeling of aversion appeared to protect the body from harmful and tasteless substances. Then it became more complex, passing through biological and cultural evolution, and took on the role of a literal bodyguard from infection and disease. And subsequently, it moved into the moral sphere, where it already began to regulate human behavior. American social psychologist Jonathan David Haidt specializes in morality and moral emotions. He is the author of The Happiness Hypothesis: Finding Modern Truth in Ancient Wisdom. In this book, he describes the relationship of the resulting aversion to various phenomena which are of human origin and yet contrary to the divine. The scientist analyzed the sacred texts of the main religions and noticed the criticism of aspects related directly to the body. Food, masturbation, sex, menstruation, hygiene fell under this criticism. All these things are identified with an aversion to religion. Most denominations try to nullify any reminder of human animalism and mortality. Not without reason, in many religions there are rituals of purification. Haidt compares the evolution of aversion to Jacob's ladder, which this Old Testament character dreamt and, in his dream, connected heaven and earth. An animal's mortal essence is at the bottom, and divine purity is at the top. The task of a person is to move up this staircase. Jonathan Haidt considers this opposition as comfort in the face of one of the main and most disturbing aspects of human nature, mortality. A study by scientist Ruth Aharoni from Copenhagen University Hospital, which was conducted in 2012, confirms the connection of anorexia with such an emotion as aversion. Ruth found an increased emotional experience of aversion, in particular to food and waste products, in people with anorexia. Psychologist Laith Al-Shawaf from Colorado State University, in turn, found in 2017 that the feeling of aversion is more characteristic of women than men. Moreover, both at the sociocultural and neuroanatomical levels. On the one hand, shame and aversion appear in women when they fail to meet certain social standards. On the other hand, women differ from men in the structure of their insula, which plays a key role in regulating responses to aversion. This is why it is more common for women to experience self-loathing and subsequently to suffer anorexia. The last case of anorexia on religious grounds was recorded in Chicago. A girl named Jane, born in 1948, entered the convent at the age of 13 and lived there throughout her youth. She fasted a lot, planning to become a saint. When her mentors noticed Jane's serious weight loss and sent her to her parents, her weight dropped to 35 kilograms. After that, a long path to recovery began. The girl spent months in psychiatric clinics, where they even placed a feeding tube in her. While working with her therapist, Jane acknowledged that her eating disorder to some extent really was because of her trying to be thin, and that she was acting for more than just religious reasons. She said that the thought of weighing more than 36 kilograms was terrible for her. She had body image distress and frequently pinched her abdomen skin to check for fat. Before the outbreak of medieval holy anorexia had subsided, a stormy wave of Victorian anorexia arose. In 1859, the American physician William Chipley described a disease that he called the fear of food. Chipley worked in a psychiatric hospital, and parents often brought to his clinic young girls who stubbornly refused food. The girls were from bourgeois families, where there was no shortage of various delicacies, but nevertheless they stubbornly refused to eat. Almost 10 years later, an English physician, William Gull, paid attention to a similar phenomenon among young aristocrats and called it apepsia hysterica. In the same year, the French physician Ernest Charles Lassague published a lengthy article in which he referred to hysterical anorexia. Lassague wrote that girls between 15 and 20 are susceptible to it, and that this disorder is caused by psychological factors. For example, by fear of an upcoming marriage and a sense of pressure from society. Some 19th century physicians often explain the refusal to eat as a desire to control others and be the center of attention, as well as a desire to avoid the duties of a wife and remain under parental care. Exhausted by starvation, the girls became helpless, and their parents continued to take care of them. Habits of anorexia also originated in schools, where girls were often poorly fed. Even in prestigious boarding schools, students were sometimes kept on bread and water in order to raise well-bred ladies out of them. As a result, in adolescence, the girls began to eat only a couple of spoons of soup, a slice of bread, a few olives, and a few raisins for lunch, or even completely refused food. The fear of food reached paranoia. For example, some ladies were afraid of meat, which supposedly stimulated animal passions. In the middle of the 19th century, a disease spread among the girls in which the patient's skin acquired a greenish tint. Doctors described this condition as one characterized by a lack of energy, weight loss, problems with appetite, and depressed mood. Modern doctors believe that was anemia caused by iron deficiency. If the bourgeois girls of the Victorian era were starving in fear of marriage and out of a desire to look more refined, then representatives of the less aristocratic social groups did it for much simpler reasons, in order to become famous and earn money. In 1896, news of a 14-year-old Welsh woman named Sarah Jacob spread throughout the United Kingdom and beyond. The girl's parents, Carmarthenshire farmers, claimed that their daughter did not need food at all, and her body could exist in a complete absence of food. They received visitors exposing their daughter as a divine miracle. The admiring audience came from all over to look at the girl, left money and various gifts for Sarah and her family. Soon, the news of the girl who doesn't need food reached the national press. Even more, an article about her was even published in the famous medical journal, The Lancet. Eventually, the medical community gathered a group of 4 nurses and sent them to the girl's home to observe her and find out if Sarah was hiding food and drink. The nurses began their observation on December 9, 1869, and a week later, Sarah Jacob died of exhaustion. During the entire period of the nurse's presence, no one tried to feed her. An autopsy performed after the girl's death showed a healthy anatomy and adipose tissue, as well as bowel fecal matter. All this testified that she always ate food and really refused it only after the nurse's arrival. In July 1870, Sarah's parents, Evan and Hannah Jacob, were tried by a Carmarthenshire jury on charges of manslaughter. They pleaded not guilty but were nonetheless convicted and sentenced to prison. The story of Sarah Jacob was briefly mentioned in the famous English writer Charles Dickens' Notes. He commented on the attention she aroused as follows: "There has been a strange story in the magazines lately about a fasting girl from Wales, but it seems that journalists simply do not know how frequent cases of this kind have been in recent years." Another example of starving for money and attention was the Englishwoman Anne Moore. The woman was so poor that she did not have enough money for food. In 1806, she came to public attention as a medical curiosity. She ate so little that doctors began to write about her. In a short time, Anne was able to earn 400 pounds by demonstrating her starvation, and this despite the fact that the annual salary of a clerk in a good office was about 117 pounds. In 1813, Anne Moore's popularity reached its peak. She was offered a scientific experiment in which several doctors would be on duty around the clock with her. Their goal was to confirm she didn't eat any food and to officially document the miracle that Anne Moore represented. The woman agreed and went through 10 days of observation. Although a few months after the experiment, she died of exhaustion. Even earning 4 annual salaries, she could not bring herself to eat. The negative consequences for the body were points of no return. The physicians of that time came to the unanimous conclusion that starving patients should be force-fed. Besides, in the second half of the 19th century, a new way to deal with hysteria and anorexia appeared: rest cure. It was proposed by the American doctor Silas Weir Mitchell, who actively used it in his practice. This physician conducted active scientific work and also studied the issues of physiology, toxicology, pharmacology, and neuropathology. He was sure that he knew better than anyone how to rid starving women of their illnesses. Usually, the rest cure lasted 6 weeks to several months. During the first weeks, the patient was forbidden not only to walk or sit, but even to roll over from side to side without assistance. The patient could not see her relatives, only a doctor and nurse, who came to bathe her and feed her with a spoon. Reading, writing letters, sometimes even talking, all this fell under the ban. To pump up the patient's body with energy, Dr. Mitchell insisted on hourly consumption of high-fat dairy products. The meat was cut into small pieces so that the patients did not waste energy chewing. A measured life, complete obedience to a doctor, simple nutrition, and a total absence of mental stress, according to Mitchell, should have restored mental balance. In 1885, the American writer and famous feminist Charlotte Perkins Gilman was one of Dr. Mitchell's patients. After treatment, Mitchell discharged her with the following parting words: "Keep a home lifestyle. Spend all the time with your child. After each meal, rest, lying down for an hour. Spend no more than 2 hours a day on mental activities, and never in your life touch a pen, brush, or pencil." Charlotte Gilman later wrote about her treatment experience in the story The Yellow Wallpaper, which soon became a bestseller in the feminist press. This is a story about a woman who is confined in a room for 3 months for the sake of her own health. She becomes obsessed with the yellow wallpaper in the room. The narrator must comply with the demands of the prescribed treatment, which contrast with what she really needs: mental stimulation and freedom. The story, The Yellow Wallpaper, was Charlotte's answer to Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell. Later, she sent him a copy of her work. Today, scientists continue to explore the mechanisms of anorexia nervosa to identify its causes, which would help them eventually find more effective ways to treat it. Relatively recently, they found that the brains of people with anorexia nervosa are very sensitive to rewards that are associated with the disorder itself. For example, to get pleasure after heavy physical exertion. A person without anorexia getting into the gym for a hard workout without eating will not enjoy it. It will be hard and difficult for him. But the brain of a person with anorexia will provide him with maximum pleasure from physical torture. The result is a vicious circle. Anorexia nervosa leads to anhedonia, inability to feel pleasure, but at the same time makes you enjoy the feeling of hunger and physical fatigue. The causes of anorexia can be different. Even genetic predisposition plays a role. People who have a family member with anorexia nervosa are 11 times more likely to develop eating disorders. No less important is the social factor, when a person falls under the influence of the environment, requiring him or her to meet certain standards. Psychological reasons suggest that anorexia has developed against the background of intra-family and other conflicts. Besides, the dysfunction of neurotransmitters regulating eating behavior, such as serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, may account for the disease. According to the research findings, patients with eating disorders suffer from dysfunction of all three of the above mediators. Nutritional deficiencies also play their role. For example, zinc deficiency, although it does not cause anorexia, can aggravate it. Many health problems fell to the lot of the famous actress Angelina Jolie. In 2007, after the death of her mother, she began to change a lot. Her weight was rapidly dropping. The death of a loved one greatly unnerved the actress. She stopped eating and slept very little. The world media ranted against the actress with accusations of promoting excessive thinness, which only aggravated the situation. Emotional and psychological problems often cause the manifestations of anorexia. But one of the possible reasons for the development of the disease in Angelina could be empathy syndrome. As a UN Goodwill ambassador, she spent a lot of time with people who are hungry and do not have full access to food. Filming for First They Killed My Father, directed by Angelina Jolie, took place in Cambodia. It was there that her work to participate in the lives of starving children once began. During her work on this film, Angelina's thinness was especially noticeable. A highly developed capacity for empathy, enhanced by exhausting creative workloads and continuous work, could have a direct impact on the mental state of the actress. With the height of 170 centimeters, she weighed only 35 kilograms. The main symptom of anorexia nervosa is reduced body weight. Catelet's body mass index is 17.5 or lower. In prepubertal age, there may be an inability to gain weight during growth. Weight loss is caused by the patient himself through the avoidance of food that makes him look fuller, as well as sometimes excessive gymnastic exercises. But there are people with eating disorders who look healthy, even though they may actually be very sick. There is atypical anorexia nervosa when a person has all the classic symptoms, restricts himself in nutrition and loses weight, is afraid to gain weight, and has a distorted perception of his or her shape. But at the same time, his or her body mass index is normal. Lack of proper nutrition leads to the development of a general endocrine disorder, which is manifested by amenorrhea, the absence of menstruation in women, and by loss of sexual desire and sexual vigor in men. If anorexia develops in adolescence, then the main manifestations of puberty are delayed and are not even observed in a child. Other symptoms of anorexia nervosa also include the patient's denial that he or she has this problem, sleep disturbance, emotional instability, and a panic fear of gaining extra pounds. Often these people begin to avoid communication with friends and relatives, spend a lot of time alone, show a constant change of mood. The inability to share their attitude toward food with others makes them withdraw into themselves. Problems arise in their immediate environment. They are unable to assess their weight objectively. Its loss is recorded as an achievement and its gain as insufficient self-control. Actress Zosia Mamet admitted in an interview that she suffered from anorexia as a child. When the girl's star was 8 years old, she was first told that she was too fat and her clothes did not fit her properly. For a child, this was a severe blow to self-esteem. Then Zosia stopped eating normally and started her week-long fasting. This continued until the girl's father decided to send her for treatment. Mamet says that then there was a most difficult struggle between stereotypes and self-awareness as a person in her head. Even now, there is a voice inside her urging Zosia to lose weight to the point of exhaustion, and although it becomes quieter, its presence is still felt. Anorexia nervosa goes through several stages in its development. The first of these is dysmorphophobia. This is a mental disorder when a person is overly concerned about a minor defect or feature of his or her body. In patients with anorexia, at this stage, due to imaginary fullness, thoughts about their own inferiority and handicap predominate. Moodiness, anxiety, and prolonged staring at oneself in the mirror are common. During this period, the first attempts at food restriction, the search for the ideal diet, arise. The second stage is anorexia as it is. It occurs against the background of persistent starvation. A weight loss of 20 to 30% is achieved, which leads to euphoria and an even greater diet. The patient actively persuades him or herself and others that he or she has no appetite and exhausts himself or herself with great physical exertion. Due to a distorted perception of his or her body, the patient underestimates the degree of his or her weight loss. The volume of fluid circulating in the body decreases, which causes hypotension and bradycardia. This condition is accompanied by chills, dry skin, and hair loss. Another clinical sign is ischemia in women and a decreased libido in men. Adrenal function is also impaired, up to adrenal insufficiency. Due to the active breakdown of tissues, appetite is suppressed. The third stage is cachexia. This is a period of irreversible dystrophy of internal organs. It comes after about 1.5 to 2 years of fasting. During this period, weight loss reaches 50% or more of normal weight. Proteinless edema occurs. The water electrolyte balance is disturbed, and the potassium level in the body is drastically reduced. This step is usually irreversible. Dystrophic changes result in irreversible inhibition of the functions of the whole organism and death. American Pie star Tara Reid is famous not so much for her acting talent as for the changes that have taken place in her appearance since gaining popularity. Painful thinness turned a healthy girl into an anti-advertisement of diets. But unfortunately, Reid does not greatly worry about her anorexia. According to the actress, she is completely satisfied with her shapes. Anorexia often leads to numerous health problems. For example, it often provokes cardiac arrhythmia. The patient begins to suffer from fainting and dizziness. They are constantly cold due to a slow pulse. The work of the digestive system is disturbed. Convulsive pains in the stomach and nausea appear. The skin becomes dry. Swelling appears due to a lack of proteins. Fingernail structure is disturbed. Osteoporosis and frequent pathological fractures of bones, vertebra, and a shrinkage of the brain are possible. Psychological consequences include hyperactivity, depression, social anxiety, panic disorder, anxiety disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and even suicidal tendencies. Approximately 50% of patients suffering from anorexia also have signs of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. About 15% of all patients exhibit compulsive behavior. They abuse alcohol and drugs, are prone to compulsive shopping and promiscuity. On average, patients need from 9 to 20 years to cure anorexia. This involves those of them who have realized their illness and asked for help. Amy Winehouse, the best jazz singer of our time, had everything one could dream of: fame, money, fans. However, despite this, she suffered from various types of addictions, among which were also eating disorders. Anorexia greatly changed the appearance of Winehouse. Instead of a sexy and eccentric girl, she quickly became a haggard skeleton. This lifestyle has not been in vain. Amy Winehouse died at the age of 27. Behavioral, cognitive, and family therapy are core ingredients in the treatment of anorexia nervosa. Behavioral psychotherapy helps in the necessary habits training and thus contributes to weight gain. Cognitive psychotherapy is aimed at correcting the distorted perception of your body. It teaches you not to reduce your own value only to the physical image. An essential feature of cognitive therapy is monitoring. The patient should make daily records of food intake, including the type of food eaten, the time of the meal, and a description of the environment in which the meal was taken. Family therapy is also important, especially for children under 18 years of age. Its programs typically use emotional care and support, as well as a combination of reinforcing stimuli and unifying exercise. The nutritional management of patients with anorexia nervosa is also an important part of their treatment. In chronic starvation, energy requirements are reduced. Therefore, weight gain can be promoted by providing a relatively low-calorie intake and then gradually increasing it. There are several regimens for increasing nutrition, the observance of which guarantees the absence of side effects and such complications as edema, impaired mineral metabolism, and lesions of the digestive system. In 2004, actress Mary-Kate Olsen, one of the two famous Olsen twins, experienced the hardships of popularity. A busy schedule, stress from being in the spotlight, and the first parting with her sister, when the girls began to live separately, greatly affected the psychological state of the actress. On this basis, Mary-Kate developed anorexia, because of which she had to go to a rehabilitation center in Utah for a month. According to doctors, the actress checked into the hospital in a devastating condition, close to death. There are several options for how anorexia nervosa can end for a patient. This is either a complete recovery or a relapsing course with periods of improvement and deterioration, or death as a result of irreversible changes in the internal organs. According to statistics, without treatment, anorexia nervosa patients' mortality rate is 5 to 10%. In some cases, anorexia nervosa is replaced by pathological overeating, which subsequently leads to weight gain and a number of mental problems of a different nature. Many have heard about the passion of the British singer and fashion designer Victoria Beckham for losing weight. Corsets, strict diet, long hours in the gym. It all started with the careless advice of the producer. While still a member of the Spice Girls, Victoria received a piece of valuable advice. The girl was recommended to lose a couple of tens of kilograms in order to increase her popularity. As a result, the 2000s became the most difficult period in her life. And although since then Victoria has learned to eat properly, in accordance with the needs of her body, her shape still raises questions among many nutritionists. While the majority of people suffering from anorexia are young women, eating disorders can occur in people of any gender, age, race, ethnic group, body shape, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic status. Eating disorders are not a personal choice. They are serious illness that is biologically determined. Adi Barkan is a renowned Israeli photographer who shoots for fashion magazines, advertisements, and catalogs. He is also one of the most famous representatives of the modeling business. In 2005, Adi took the initiative to ban the shooting of anorexic models. According to Barkan, malnutrition, as an attempt to measure up the canons of the style, has become one of the most common diseases of Israeli women. In early 2006, the photographer announced his intention to open his own modeling agency with new standards of beauty. The position of the photographer did not go unnoticed. On the 19th of March 2012, a bill banning the use of unhealthily thin models in advertising campaigns was approved in Israel. Since 2005, International Anorexia Day has been celebrated on November 16th. It was established to draw public attention to the severity of the problem of eating disorders and finally help people suffering from anorexia overcome this problem once and for all. Sincerely yours, Dr. Popmed.